Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Backlog, where we are endeavoring to play through every game ever to varying degrees of success. I am Dan, and I'm joined by Joe.
Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty good. We're trying something a little bit special today, something a little bit different.
Yeah, it's exciting.
It is exciting. I hope this turns out as well as I'm,
Envisioning?
hoping it turns. I don't wanna,
I think that's on you.
That is on me. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the Dark Souls series,
Which I enjoy.
Yeah, but you're very surface level on
Very
this, right?
surface level. Yeah, I've not played anything past the first one.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm aware of what they are,
And have seen stuff.
and yeah, I actually have watched an entire playthrough of Demon Souls as well. So I and put a bunch of hours into Dark Souls. So
Which
I definitely understand like what they are, how they work, and I really enjoy what it brings to the table.
So what I wanted to do here is go through and first off, put a disclaimer. I'm bad at Dark Souls. I am not one of your top tier Dark Souls players. I'm one of those people. I grind. I level up. Past the fights to some extent, if that's a thing.
Like over leveling content.
I suppose. But here's the thing: is
I mean, why does that make you bad at Dark Souls?
well, I'm saying I'm not good at Dark Souls, and so
Why do you say that?
Well, like, that's a good point. I don't expect this is like some guy like where I'm doing level 1 soul runs, or I'm doing a naked build, or I'm like I play through it 3 different times, and then I min max, and I know how all the stats interact.
So you're not necessarily just as hardcore as some of these guys are.
True.
Okay.
And here's the thing: is I will summon for fights
Okay.
because you can summon other people. It's in the
Right.
game.
Yep.
But I'm saying don't expect any kind of like uber elite take on this. This is just
That might be a better way to say it. You're not an elitist. You're not a Dark Souls elitist.
Yes. I'm not going to be like, that's not proper Dark Souls. I'm not that guy. I am not that guy. What I am, though, is a fan of the game itself and what I get out of it. So this is very much a, what you call it, like a headcanon-y look at how I perceive Dark Souls.
Sure.
Because the other part of that disclaimer would be, I also don't scour the game for lore and take notes and be like, oh, this item says this, and I've watched some of that stuff, and it's fascinating to a point, but at the end of the day, I kind of just like, I like what I get out of it as well, because if they're going to obscure the story, then I can kind of fill in the gaps how I want to as well, make my character feel like my character.
And they don't just obscure the story; they obscure how everything in that game works.
And you were
stats wise and everything. So
they've gotten better about that, but there are some things,
right? I guess I'm speaking from Dark Souls.
Yes.
Like I know Dark Souls, I know Demon Souls, and that's very early on in the infancy of this series. All of that's very like obscurity. You don't know what any of these stats exactly do, how exactly to build.
Yeah, that's true. It's only you have wikis and things now that contribute to that, so
Yeah, the fan base has developed quite a bit of aftermarket support, if you will.
Though there's still some question on what adaptability does from Dark Souls 2, or it's still not it's not nailed down. It's a stat you could put points into, and people aren't totally
They're
sure.
not 100% sure. Yeah, which is an interesting way to develop a game.
Yeah.
And the way stats work in that regard. And I always found that kind of fascinating that, even though people have played this quite a bit, put hundreds of hours into it outside of what I've done, it's still not 100%.
Right. And it's one of the things like, well, it changed the feel, so I think it did this.
Right. Maybe.
Do I get more iframes? I don't know. It's
delightful.
It's fantastic in that regard. But this is going to be a non-elitist, just a enthusiast look at a very Tumblr level look at Dark Souls.
Hobby grade Dark Souls.
Nice, exactly.
Nice.
Joe, what do you know about the world of Dark Souls?
Little to even less, I guess. I mean, just knowing that it's a very dark setting. I never, even though I put hours and hours into Dark Souls, I never really knew what was going on. It was more of an enjoyment of gameplay
and feel.
Yeah, and ambiance.
Yeah.
Like it's a beautiful, beautiful, weird, dark world that they create,
And
they throw you right into it.
Yes,
and you're just kind of like suddenly in this, and you know very little about why you're there, what you're doing, and just that you need to keep moving forward.
right.
I guess
it's very evocative.
Sure,
you just go, oh, and you just kind of soak in everything.
It does have an aesthetic of like just real. Trying to think what I would call it. I guess sort of eldritch, I guess. I don't know. It's real dark.
It's old. It's definitely old. Archaic.
Baroque.
Yeah. These are words that mean old.
These are old words that mean specific things from a time and place.
At a time that's long past.
Yes.
You feel like you're in a place that has passed its time. Its time has passed, I should say.
Yeah, everything's very decrepit. Everything's in ruins, except save a few specific areas that I saw in Dark Souls.
But it all, yeah,
pretty run down, pretty. I don't know. It shows its age.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can almost smell it.
Yeah, if the good thing they don't have smell-o-vision, right?
Smell-o-vision.
So the way the world works. Let me give you kind of an overworld or overlook.
I mean, yeah. How about you tell me?
Well, I needed to gauge where you were at.
Oh, I mean,
that's it. No, that's good. That's enough.
Yeah.
You've given me enough.
I've given you enough. Yeah.
So basically, every Dark Souls game begins at the end of the Age of Fire.
Okay.
So it is the end of an era.
So what is the Age of Fire then?
In the first one, that's the intro movie kind of shows this, is you have Lord Gwyn and these other, I don't even know, like demigods, gods, what you would call them. Basically people of power, heroes of old, if you will, that have basically ascended to some kind of godhood.
Interesting. Okay.
And what they do is they slay the undying dragons. There's these immortal dragons. And they slay them.
So is this Age of Fire considered like the golden age, like when things
the gods,
when things were good?
They basically, once they killed the dragons, and they had what's the Lord Soul is what Gwyn had.
Okay.
And basically, if you want to, I don't need this. What a soul is in this context is not super clear, but it might as well be an artifact of power or a power one takes into oneself. And he basically starts the Age of Fire. The age of what becomes the Age of Man is eventually in there, but the Age of Fire is basically the Age of the gods, the golden age for them.
Okay, so it's kind of a standard tropey.
Yeah, yes, very much so.
Arc of progression for humanity.
Yes, and where you come in, it's been untold millennia. And what has happened is part of the Age of Fire is there's this. There's basically there's not a bonfire, because bonfires are what you light. Those are linked to what's called the first flame, and it's tied to the Age of Fire. And at some point, in order to keep the Age of Fire going, Lord Gwyn actually sacrifices himself to the first flame to keep the fires going. Basically, he sacrificed himself to keep this golden age going, and it still ends up decaying. It only bought time.
Okay.
And your choice at the end of
why is the first flame going out?
Doesn't really talk about it.
They don't really talk about it?
They don't really talk about it. It's just, entropy.
Sure.
So, okay. And so at the end of the first game, you have the choice of walking out of the kiln of the first flame. I love the names of things. And you fight what is basically the hollow Lord Gwyn. We'll get to what hollowing is here in a bit, but
I remember.
Yeah, we may have talked about that on another video.
I doubt it. I just remember from playing.
That's true.
Because
they flush it out more. So in 3, they give you a little bit more on that.
Oh, okay,
and 2 as well. But what it becomes is you fight the hollowed Lord Gwyn, and when you beat him, you have the option of leaving the kiln of the first flame and letting the Age of Fire end, or sacrificing yourself and pushing and keeping the Age of Fire going.
So where are we at in game time?
That's the end of Dark Souls 1.
Oh, okay. So I did not get that far.
You did not get that far. That's the choice. That's the choice you get.
Okay.
At the end of the first Dark Souls. And the other games kind of don't address what's the canon ending, because they kind of argue that it doesn't matter that this is cyclical anyway.
Which I dig.
Yeah, that this is just how it plays out.
That's why I like Battlestar Galactica as much as I do. This has happened before. It will happen again.
There you go. Yeah, that's basically Dark Souls, because you're going to New Game Plus it. We know you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so the choice in every game is fight against the end of the Age of Fire or usher in the darkness to something else.
Okay. Light side, dark side choices?
Well, here's the funny part. There's a lot of arguments over which is the good ending and which is the bad ending.
Okay, interesting.
Because there's getting into characters a little bit, there's a whole bunch of people that if you get into things and talk to them and kind of compare notes, everybody's basically trying to get you to, they're manipulating you to try and get you to do what they want. The two, I don't know if you met the dragons in the first Dark Souls.
I mean, I killed dragons.
No, sorry, Frampt and big toothy serpents.
Oh,
sorry, they're
what area would they have been in?
Well, one, his head pops out of the that water area in the shrine.
Okay,
Firelink Shrine.
Yes, I do remember that.
The big toothy guy.
Yes, vaguely. Yes.
So him and his, let's say, brother.
I mean, we were coming at this. It's been a few years since I've played Dark Souls.
Basically, him and his brother are playing both sides. That whatever happens, they win.
Okay,
is what it appears to be.
Smart.
You have also the elude Guinevere. Then you got to Guinevere then after beating Smo and Ornstein.
Wow, which boss is that?
The two, the fat dude and the skinny dude.
Fat dude and skinny dude. Ah, man, it's been a while.
Maybe not. Anyway, it doesn't
I don't
matter.
remember specific bosses, except just like from how I came across them in my progression.
You would remember her. Guinevere is the ridiculously large-breasted woman.
I must have missed that.
And she's also like 5 times as large as you are.
Maybe I did. I don't remember.
Anyway, she's not real. She's an illusion of someone else who's playing you.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the kind of we're kind of focusing on Dark Souls 1 here, but
I mean that's where I kind of started. So
shades of that repeat in Dark Souls 2 and 3. Dark Souls 2, it's more like you hit the ground running, and they're saying, look, you need to.
So is there a story progression between these 3? Like, is it sequelized, or is this just like individual cycles of this process?
Yes and no.
Interesting. Okay.
Currently going through Dark Souls 3. So yes, I do know it gets there. It absolutely. You walk into
like they're very much trying to like say this is the cycle, and you're just reliving it.
In that you literally walk into sections of Dark Souls 1,
and you're not the same
in 3
character over and over.
No,
are you? Okay, because I know there's some aspects of immortality involved in like
So let's get into
these people.
Yeah, let's jump right into
these
Halloween.
quote unquote heroes and hollows, and
well, the heroes tend to be immortal. Though, or they could be undead. The undead,
right,
is a curse, is what they call it. The undead curse. And what happens is you die, but I don't know if you just respawn someplace, because once you're in the area of where the flames are, the bonfires, you respawn at bonfires.
Right.
You respawn at bonfires.
Spawn out of the flame.
Out of the flame, you're brought back. Though the whole point is, you start to lose your mind and your senses. And Halloween,
and they do a pretty good job of telling you about that
through the other characters as well. Like you talk to you, they're most, to my knowledge, there is not a single character that you can interact with in Dark Souls that you save from Halloween, with the exception of Solera of Astora.
Yeah,
the Sun Bro.
Oh,
I love the Sun Bro.
Praise the sun.
I think you can save him, but it's not. I'm not sure. But most of the characters, it's inevitable. And there are characters that say, "Hey, so here, have this thing of mine. I'm going to lose my mind. I hope I don't come after you later." And of course, you end up fighting them later. Almost everybody goes hollow.
Okay, yeah, I do vaguely remember some of that. Now, that was something that I found pretty confusing in Dark Souls. I don't know if it gets better in 2 or 3, but being able to kind of like align yourself with some of these
covenants.
Covenants. That's what it was.
The guilds and things like that. Yes, in 3,
because like you could do that in Dark Souls 1, but it was never very clear, obviously, like what benefit that would have or what you're giving up versus gaining, because there was always a trade-off of like, hey, if you align yourself with X person, because I know I was big into ranged weapons, as people may know, and there was part where you could covenant with a certain character that had the best bow in the game.
Yes.
And very early on, you can kind of cheese it and kill that character, and get the bow. You lose that covenant, and there's no way to really get it back because you killed that person you were supposedly covenanting with.
Right.
So I mean, and that didn't really impact me in a way that I was able to understand, because it is such a gray thing.
It does depend on the covenant, but 1 and 2 are basically identical.
Okay.
There's the same system. You can level up in covenants and you get items from that. In 3, most of the covenants aren't actually attached to a person.
Interesting. Okay.
It's an icon that you can equip, and you swap them out.
So narratively speaking, that doesn't really impact.
It's not really a part of the story at all.
Okay.
There is some story beats for like how you're basically dimension jumping and killing other heroes if you're invading other people's games and things of that nature. That's built in to some extent, and that there's some kind of, I don't want to call them throwaway lines, but they're throwaway lines.
Okay.
And what you need to do,
I mean, it's not really a narratively driven game per se.
Yes, but
you're in the world, and it's kind of you get out of it what you put into it.
It's you driving yourself,
yeah.
And if narrative drives you, that's what's driving the game.
Sure.
But yes, it's not the focus.
It's not fed to you like it is in a lot of other games.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really enjoy. It's a game that says, "Hey man, take this at your own pace. If you want to dig through items. We're not gonna pressure you. Hey man, it's cool.
It's cool, man."
So the difference in Dark Souls 3 is it's an item that you can equip.
Oh, the Covenants are?
The Covenant is.
Okay,
it's like an icon, and as you do certain things, you generally there's an altar to that Covenant, and you gain items like for the Sun Bros, the Warriors of Sunlight.
Yes, of course.
I don't think Solaire is not in the game, but basically by putting the Warriors of Sunlight in, they are. It's a co-op Covenant. So as you help other players, you get a medallion of sunlight, and anybody you help gets a medallion of sunlight, I believe. And what it is you can then go to that altar, turn those in, and that's how you level up that Covenant. I've been a good sun bro. Here are my rewards. Is kind of how it does. Like I was invaded by a phantom, an NPC phantom. I killed him and got his Covenant item for the Covenant he belonged to, and I found that shrine and I offered it up. They're like, "Hey, strength the Covenant deepen," and I'm like, "I'm not a part of this Covenant. I don't care." But it's out of my inventory now, and I don't have to worry about it.
Okay,
so I've got that going for me.
Interesting that they have kind of removed the impact of that.
I don't think that's true because the Covenants are always kind of a side thing anyway. I don't know if it lessens the impact.
Interesting.
It just removes some of the obscurity.
As I kind of felt like that was kind of like the little bit of story and or kind of world that existed, that was kind of part of it. I mean, they gave you tidbits of what these Covenants are, like what they stand for and what their goals were.
There is some of that in
aligning
3,
yourself with them would give you whatever benefits. It's kind of interesting that seems to be lessened as it's not tied to a specific person like it was before. Because there was wasn't there like a Cheshire cat in the first one as well? Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember seeing that, and I was like,
the forest protectors or whatever.
Yeah, something interesting. It was kind of interesting that these little bits of story and world building existed in these characters, these people you could align yourself with.
Right. Well, those characters are still around. There are still characters that you can interact with, and there is still the lore for the Covenants, but it's not. You can't accidentally kill somebody and break that chain of the Covenant.
Interesting. Okay.
Is kind of how they've done it. In most cases, I think there's
less punishing.
A little less punishing. The thing that's interesting about hollowing is that you have characters that you can watch sort of lose themselves, and they sort of know it. Not Lucille, but something like that. Lucatiel. Lucatiel from Dark Souls 2 has come to the land that the game's taking place in to try and see if she can break the undead curse, find her brother, but also try and just kind of deal with the curse itself that she is contracted here.
So that does actually tie Dark Souls 2 to 3.
No, that's just her character arc.
Oh, okay.
So her character in 2 is losing her mind, and eventually you find her hollowed, but not before she says, "Hey, here's her items, like her special items and stuff like that. Here's my gear. Here's her outfit and all that stuff." Like she gives you that and says, "Hey, remember me when I'm gone." Okay. And then she goes hollow, because that's the kind of the truly sad thing is these people lose themselves completely, but they never die. They don't go away. They just become the mindless zombies that you've been fighting the whole game. So every mindless zombie that you're fighting was somebody.
I mean, that's incredibly depressing, but yes.
And that's
kind of how that would work, right?
Right. That's the whole point is these were maybe great heroes, maybe great villains, maybe just average people who were taken by the curse, and now they're just mindless husks, and there's no part of what made them them.
Now, is this like a Walking Dead style, like
infected?
Everyone's infected.
No.
Everyone's going to hollow at some point.
No.
In death and or whatever.
Well, we're not sure, but the lore that's there, no. Basically, there's in the first game.
So, do they even tell you what dictates what's going to hollow a person, or is it just arbitrary?
There's some speculation on what it is. Having a goal, having enough willpower, being strong, having a noble soul. There's all these kind of talking around it. Though in 2 and 3, you have characters that straight taunt you and say, like, "Oh, I'm sure you'll figure this out. You're not just like all the rest. Who am I kidding? You're going to die a lot and you will go hollow. You are just like everyone else here." There are people that just be like, "You're just going to lose your mind like everybody does." Because
I do remember some of that talk from like the hub areas.
Right. Yeah, you do get like your crestfallen warrior who hangs out in Dark Souls 1. Or is it Crestfallen is 2? There's that guy's in every single game. There's a version of that guy, a guy who's hanging out in the hub area.
And to be honest, I remember more of that kind of thing from Demon Souls.
Yes, there is everybody hanging out in the Nexus.
Everyone in that little Nexus,
is kind of got their own sob story. You always have a like what you call a crestfallen, a big downer who's just like, "Oh, who are we? We're nothing. You might as well just give up." But he hangs out for most of the game and then goes hollow someplace at some point,
like you do,
like they do. And they're always the most I don't want to say intense, but vivid. What would you say? The most distilled version of that.
Okay.
Here's someone who you see on their last legs of hope, or even if they have any left, their hope is gone, and they're just kind of sitting around waiting to lose their mind. Whereas you have characters like Lucatiel or Henri of Astora in Dark Souls 3, who are out there fighting. One of the things that's cool about Dark Souls 3 that I find is that each character seems to be not each character. There are certain characters that seem to be tied to each boss that you have to go fight. You're fighting the Lords of Cinder. These are people who had kindled the flame in the past and have been resurrected for that task again, but have refused to return and link the fires again.
Okay, so they're like you, but...
Well, no, you in 3, you are what was referred to as unkindled ash. You are what happens when they don't ignite the flame. You're basically just a undead who has risen with the potential to become
larval state.
Yes, that's why they call you unkindled ash. So you have a potential to become something bigger and become a Lord of Cinder, or become the Dark Lord, is usually in this case. So you have Henri of Astora, who's tied to the Bishop of the Deep. I forget all the names. There's basically, so each boss has a living character or an undead character with their sanity tied to their storyline. So you can interact with these characters and learn their stories. The storm giant Yorm, his friend, has been charged to come and kill him by him. So he's returning to this place to fulfill his oath to his friend and slay him. Henri of Astora and her companion Hector, I think it's Hector. The bishop murdered her friends when they were children, and her and Hector escaped, and they're returning to slay him again and to partake on that journey. There's your crestfallen dude was a member of the undead Legion of Farron, but he ran away, and so he's a deserter, and he is disgraced. But he's tied to them as well, that you talk to him. And there's a fourth one, and I forget, or I haven't got to him yet. But the story is woven in very subtly. They never say, "Oh, you're off to kill that guy. Well, I've got an axe to grind. Let's go.
Let's team up. Co-op time." So, I mean, and this is something I found interesting in what I've seen of Dark Souls and Demon Souls. They have these characters. They clearly have some kind of a backstory.
Yes.
They're all very well done in that, like, you kind of understand their personalities up front very well.
But they're not forthcoming with their story.
Exactly. And like, is there an underlying, like, are there underlying philosophies to these? Is it just different tropes that they're throwing at you?
Yes and no.
What would we be looking at as far as that goes? I mean, what is the goal of most of these? Is it all just self-serving? Is there a greater, like, as game developers, are they like throwing any ideas at you that are interesting?
Well, I think the thing that I find most interesting is how everyone is, the weight of the death of the world seems to be apparently resting on everyone because of the somberness of everyone's tone.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely get that.
But it's like in the dying of the light, what do these people scramble for? You have, like I said, you have Henri trying to go back and slay this monster. She's like, no, I have to get vengeance for my fallen friends. You have Big Hat Logan from Dark Souls 1, who is your typical I'm smarter than you, and ends up finding the knowledge that he seeks and being driven mad at the same time. He eventually he has a big wizard's hat.
Yeah, I remember.
But when you finally fight him, he's naked except for the hat.
That's kind of great.
Yeah, he finds the Duke's archives and he gets in there, he learns some stuff, and he loses his mind. You have characters that are clearly, I don't want to say spies, but are clearly there to keep tabs on other characters and see what happens. You have a cleric that's supposed to escort a noble lady in her quest.
I mean, I definitely did see like a lot of, especially with these kind of like bigger villain mini boss type characters that are working for, I guess, the other side, quote unquote.
Right.
Like kind of dark side, light side. I keep going back to that. But, yeah. And it may not be that cut and dry by any means, because these things never are that clear. But it seemed interesting that you had these villainous characters or like people who were opposing you would show up and clearly also had their own motivations and attitudes about things. But you never get to know a lot about that other than you're killing them. And
you're killing them,
taking their armor.
And reading what it says.
And just reading stuff. And I didn't dig that much into it as far as narrative goes. I wasn't trying to piece anything together. It was more just like a...
What's this guy's deal?
I let it kind of wash over me. And just like, okay, what is this? I would like to see, and then maybe, at some point do a new game plus. I probably need to go back and finish Dark Souls just to see what that looks like end to end. But I was I didn't know if there was a way to find out more.
There are a lot of people on YouTube that do the lore thing. You can I can recommend some YouTubers that if you really want to get in lore, though they sometimes disagree on certain things, or some people seem to be
with it being as obscure as it is, and
there's some leaps of logic.
There's a lot of obfuscation going on with it, and how like they don't really want to lay it out for you in that game.
It's intentional the way they've done it that way. One of my favorite.
Which I do think is interesting, and it does like provoke interest and curiosity about these things.
And
like,
thought,
it can be thought provoking. There wasn't anything very specifically from Dark Souls that I ever like was really contemplative about. But
one thing I really enjoyed, one of the kind of anecdotes of how they do that is kind of that I've seen people kind of going back and forth on lore, though people have basically accepted this as the story. You have Havel the Rock, that dude in stone armor that you fight with a big dragon tooth club.
Yes.
You find an item that lets you know that he's a bishop in the Way of White, which is the main religion of Lord Gwyn and his covenant and all that stuff.
Okay.
So he's basically the dominant religion. He was a fairly well-to-do bishop in that, but also one of the best soldiers. And he had a dispute with Seath the Scaleless, the dragon that is also the Duke in the Duke's archives. And one of the things that you hear a bunch of sideways references to him being locked, to Havel being locked into a tower and more or less forgotten or left for dead because he had gone
hollow.
Which is where you find him. But the reason you find out that he did that is he had what you find in his apartments in the actual castle city is an occult club, which ties him to a splinter dissenting group within the capital, which is also some way of saying like, oh, he might have been plotting to betray Lord Gwyn, and there was more political intrigue at play there than is apparent, and that you will never get in the game because everyone's dead or is a mindless zombie, so you're just not going to get that. You're not going to get the Game of Thrones part of what was going in there.
Yeah. That's a little disappointing, honestly.
But you hear that and you're like, wait, what?
It definitely, it makes that more interesting, but it's almost too bad that they don't surface that a little bit.
Almost. I agree. It's almost is.
It's almost.
But man, good kudos on them for just doing it anyway.
Yeah, they definitely have chosen a style and stuck with it in a way that is definitely applaudable. It's
the director of the game. I was reading a thing from a thing, and all fourth-hand information at this point. But he had
there's no other way to get it,
right?
It's Dark Souls. Yeah, they don't give that to you at all.
Oh, I also don't speak Japanese.
Oh, right. Yeah, ooh, that's an interesting.
Well,
maybe a wrinkle.
Because
it exists there.
Yes, because what he did is he grew up reading Western fantasy, with not to be fairly robust, but not a perfect understanding of English. So he would get the major plot points and the gist of what was happening, but the nuance was gone. So he was reading these novels and he's totally missing the nuance of why characters are doing what. And he kind of had to intuit all of that. And that affected him in a way that when they came to make this, that's why it's all hidden in item descriptions and nothing is
definitely makes that a lot more understandable and kind of more interesting as well. In that, like, you see that he's basically just world building. It's not necessarily like individual character nuance,
right?
Even though some of that does exist, it's
very
much more like overarching theory and a kind of fleshing out of the world itself and not individual characters. Because you definitely get that a lot more just playing through Dark Souls. Is like you definitely understand the world is in peril in a very dark place, and even though you're only getting like snippets of each of these characters' personalities.
It feels like most of the story has eroded over time because it's been so long.
Yeah,
and I love
it also
that.
makes it a bit more believable.
Yeah,
in a way, because you never have all the details.
Never,
like, regardless of what like life throws at you. You never know everything.
Right,
and
even what you know might be wrong.
True. Yeah,
and Dark Souls introduces enough for you to plausibly be like, I don't believe this person.
Yeah. No, that definitely fits.
Yeah,
and that's interesting to think about as well. How much more would exist in Japanese, or how much is there
if they went full JRPG?
Not necessarily, just even like the way it's localized or not localized, because there are a lot of nuances in forms of language and things that we don't have in English.
But I think that's why the game works, is because it was made by Japanese people, intentionally leaving nuance out. So all you get is just
yeah. But then you're afraid, like, oh, does that just mean that it's not as fleshed? I mean, is it not there to be had?
I will point you to some videos that say otherwise. It is there. It is absolutely there in ways that you don't even expect. You're like, wait, oh, well, all right, this is all very interesting. The whole in the first the DLC for Dark Souls 1, you have the character of Artorias,
right? And
you have in the main game before it came up, you had the fight with Sif, his wolf. That you find the grave of Artorias, and there's his greatsword is standing there, and this wolf shows up and grabs the greatsword and fights you. And there are still people to this day trying to figure out a way to beat the game without killing Sif, because they don't like killing Sif, especially after you. Okay,
why?
Well, let me layer on some stuff here.
Okay,
so that Cheshire cat that when you find her, she says, "Oh, yeah, the legend of Artorias is a lie." Basically saying all the item descriptions that you're getting talks about as this great knight who descended into the abyss to slay the darkness there, and basically he was this great warrior. And she says, "No, that's all a lie."
Okay.
And he's like, "You shouldn't seek that all out." Well, the first DLC takes you back in time, and you have to fight Artorias because he did in fact descend into the abyss, but he was also consumed by it.
Interesting.
So you fight him as this abyss corrupted version of himself, and he is just amazing. That's such a cool fight. He's got one of his arms broken, is just dangling at his side, and he's one-handing this ridiculous greatsword around. And through the course of that DLC, you actually find and help save a young Sif. And they updated the game that if you had done that before you fought him in the main game, he recognizes you, but still fights you anyway. Because this is how, like, he is entrusted to guard the grave, because there's a ring that lets you traverse the darkness that is there that you have to get. It's a key item that you need. So it's one of those fights that's tough. You know, Monster Hunter, just to throw this in here, when you're wounding monsters and they get real damaged and they start limping and they slow down and they seem really, really hurt. Yes. Yeah, imagine a lovable giant wolf doing that. People struggle with that.
Okay, so they do throw a little bit of tug at the heartstrings a little.
They make it clear that you are both good guys. Well, they make it clear that Sif is a good guy. He's honor bound to do what he's doing.
Okay, and
they make it worse.
And it seems like there's a bit of that in Dark Souls as well, not just Sif, obviously. Like
it ends poorly. Is as a general rule.
Yeah, and I like that's kind of an interesting part of Dark Souls in that nobody wins to some extent. Right.
The best outcome, maybe I should jump into this here. I think Dark Souls is a game about hope. The series is about hope. And I know after all, we're talking about all this dark stuff that's happening.
Yeah, it's very dark.
But here's the thing:
I don't know how you. I mean, I understand how that's where hope is brightest, is in the dark.
This is where we get to my headcanon parts of this, where
okay,
you talk to all these people that have given up, and you walk past them and say, "Yeah," they're like, "Oh, what you're doing is futile." Okay, but it's all about because I choose to do it. And even the narrative of yes, and if I have to die 1,000 times to do it, I refuse to give up. It's this, yes, everything, even the universe itself, entropy, is trying to stop this thing. And at the end of it, I get to choose. And even if it gets 5 more minutes, that's what I choose to give myself up for. It's this, against all odds, I refuse.
Sure.
And I think that's what the difficulty leans into that and helps that. Because you don't want this game about how you're fighting against the end of everything. Well, and to be fair, it's not necessarily the end of everything. It's the Dark Age, and all these other things are going to happen. And if the cyclical reasoning is true, then it doesn't really matter because it's all going to repeat. But the point is, it's your choice. It's you're not going quietly into the night.
Right? Yeah. The hero's journey.
The hero's journey, and not only that, this absolute difficulty. The world itself is crushing in on you, and you just don't give up. And there's something about walking through a ruined world and saying, no, there's still something here. I decide to save this. I am going to give, because there's some reference to humanity being somewhere else. You're in the land of the ancient land of the undead, and somewhere else there may or may not be people. But
right, yeah, they do make a big point of that to be like, hey, you're not where normal people are.
Right. Dark Souls 1, you're captured as an undead and thrown into the asylum and then transported to Lothric? No.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Lothric, it might be 3. It's anyway.
You're very clearly not in the normal world of humans.
You were in the land of the gods, long dead.
Yeah.
The land and the gods.
So you kind of mentioned earlier interdimensionality of this place. So, I mean, are you not in the real world, quote unquote, real world? Are you in this purgatory / in between?
You're kind of in Marvel Comics. All things are being played out everywhere, kind of. Like basically, you're seeing, when you see the shades of other characters moving through, you're seeing other heroes in other times and places. Basically, they're saying, in this place, the if you excuse the phrase, the veil is thin, and you're seeing through the dimensions because it's a place of power or for whatever reason. Sure. And with the right kind of items, you can actually allow yourself to be summoned across dimensions into other realms of other heroes or villains or whatever. And so when you go and co-op, that's why when you come back, if you go co-op and beat a boss, you come back, that boss is still alive. Sure. Because you haven't killed him here. You went and helped that hero.
So arguably all Dark Souls games are happening simultaneously?
Yes. They're all happening, all valid, all endings are valid, all characters are valid. Everything is happening all at once at all times. So that's how they kind of get that. It's potentiality just made manifest.
Seems legit.
Yeah,
I can buy that.
You're like, okay, I mean, I don't know how you'd explain. Oh yeah, that's how if you want to explain
multiverse.
But it's a game about hope. Is at the end of the day. At the end of in Dark Souls 2 and 3, when they're taunting you about how you're going to go hollow and how you're not going to accomplish your goal. In 2, the goal isn't anything as significant as lighting the kiln, though that kind of gets factored into it. You are basically becoming the new king of the ancient area. You're gathering souls. With souls, you gather strength. Strength is power. Power is I now rule this place. Basically, you're seeking the great souls of the past, slaying them, and taking their power. The third one gets back into keeping the bonfires burning, relighting the flame, becoming the Dark Lord, and they definitely did a lot more interesting stuff with that. There's some.
So what is the hope for? I mean, what are you hoping in?
Do you need to have hope into something?
I mean, just generic hope.
No, I mean, it's whatever. Here's the thing: it's a blank slate. It's hope in what you want.
Okay, I mean, as a hero, it's just like whatever you're.
Basically, you see
applying your hope to.
In this case, in the first Dark Souls, my first playthrough, what it became for me was, this is the end of everything. I refuse that. I demand more time. I am going to make it so.
Okay. Yeah.
And, it wasn't like I'm like writing my fanfic as I'm playing or anything like that, but it was just a little bit of headcanon.
It's a complete novel.
Not quite. I'm more of a sci-fi guy, and you know it. Sci-fi Souls.
Ooh, man, I'm waiting for that to come.
Space Souls.
Yes.
But it became a little bit of why am I... It was the reason that I, as a player, and my character were moving forward. I wanted to get there. And so I had to overcome a lot of things. And I did spend a lot of time grinding because I also wanted to make my character stronger, because that Havel armor is heavy.
Fat roll.
Oh, I never died. I didn't
fat roll for life.
By the end, I wasn't even rolling. I was basically the new Havel the Rock,
just taking it.
Well, you have a big stone shield and a dragon's tooth, and you're like, all right,
it is cool.
You want this?
Yeah,
come get it.
It is cool,
right? It's like, yeah, this has got to be a 400-pound shield that I'm hanging off of one arm. Okay, let's do it.
I mean, it is an interesting idea to say that it is based on hope, especially in such a dark world that we really don't know if it actually has any ties or effect on the quote-unquote real world,
right?
Or if it's adjacent, or is it a limbo of sorts.
Well, if you want to get into it, is it the fever dream of an undead losing their mind?
There you go. Yeah, like, does it end up just being your own madness that is surfacing, and you just think that these things are happening?
Right, as there's just the undead Legion of Pharaon is just stabbing your corpse over and over again, and you're just like, no, I'm gonna win.
I mean, it is very much like the kind of standard purgatory, but you do exist there. You are interacting with things, and whatever that means for the future, like, you never really know.
Well, not to get all postmodernist on this thing. But it's one of those things that you can take the meaning from it you want. You could come into it as the Dark Lord perspective and be like, no, this is over, and I am the herald of a new age, and I will be that. You can do that. You can be that guy. Or you could be the guy that says,
support that. That's fine.
hey, what does this button do? And you just, this guy says I need to go over here. I'm just going to go over here.
That's kind of how I played. Was like the, just let it happen.
Right, letting it happen, but being, or kind of like that, the kind of the willing servant kind of thing. I mean, it's interesting. There's people that argue that the Dark Lord ending is actually the proper ending to Dark Souls 1.
Dark Lord in that it's the
you do not
evilist.
No, there's not
evil, or I mean, what does that mean, Dark Lord?
That's what it's called, because you become the Dark Lord. The Age of Darkness, Age of Fire is ended. The Age of Darkness begins. You are the Lord. You are now
the Lord of whatever comes after.
Yes, you are the possessor of the Dark Soul.
Okay.
In this game, the Dark Soul is humanity.
Interesting.
So there's an item that you get called humanity. In the first game,
right? Yes,
and they do a lot of interesting things with humanity. I don't want to get too deep into that.
I remember. Yeah,
but there's you could do a whole philosophical discussion on humanity in the Dark Souls games. Essentially, they're the way what is generally kind of I don't know if it's generally accepted. What I've seen the most is that when you have the furtive pygmy from the beginning, that's the first man essentially. In the Age of Gods, and he took the Dark Soul, while Gwyn took the Lord Soul and is splitting that amongst the gods and all these things. The furtive pygmy took the Dark Soul, and that's where humanity comes from. And he split it so every human has a fragment of the Dark Soul in them. So every human has the chance to...
It's getting a little anime.
Right. But they also have the potential of becoming the Dark Lord. And ushering in the end of the Age of Gods, the beginning of the Dark Age of Man, I guess you could call it. I don't know. But it's not as explicit as that, but mankind is the problem in the gods' eyes.
Isn't it the truth?
But they're also the pawns of the gods. And so that's why what you choose, no matter what you choose, you're either a pawn or you're your own man making your own decision. So that's why you have to get into that. At least I feel like getting into the headcanon space, there's no right answer, no wrong answer.
I mean, yeah, it's designed that way very purposefully, it seems. Yeah, like very much like we're not going to lay this out for you. Yeah,
exactly. And I love it so much. It's beautiful in its complex simplicity. Because it's on the surface, you're like, oh, I get what's going on here. but I know that I also don't get what's going on here.
And I mean, it is couched in a very particular style of game.
Yeah,
well.
The controls, the aesthetic.
That has very much kind of redefined a lot of the way we talk about games and the way we approach things now.
That single-handedly, you could argue. There are games like Super Meat Boy and things that happened at the same time, but it almost single-handedly revitalized and proved that there was a market for hard games.
Definitely. Or
challenging games.
Challenging, sure, whatever. Hard challenging isn't really that much of a... Like, is that where we're at? Are people really splitting hairs like that?
No, it's not.
I didn't know if that was a greater issue in the world of gaming philosophy.
Not to my knowledge.
That's good. That's good to hear. Hard games are interesting, and I think Dark Souls has carved out its own niche and kind of has prototyped a style of game that I hope to see more of.
Yeah. You already have Neo.
Yeah, Neo came out
which
of
is Samurai Dark Souls, as people call it. It's not. I've watched some stuff. It changes enough to be its own game. And I've heard a lot of people who are into those kind of harder games actually love Neo more than the Dark Souls games.
Interesting.
Because it does have more of an action focus, but you know what? I'm not there myself. I own a copy of Neo.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting way to come at a world.
Yeah.
Knowing that it is very punishing and you do have to commit to what your style of play is going to be. And you can't really on the fly just kind of be like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and, change it up. I'm going to go from an agility based thing to a full heavy armor, strength based playstyle.
They have actually, Dark Souls 2 and 3 have incorporated ways to reset your stats, so you kind of can.
That's a little disappointing.
But here's the thing is, it's not an easy thing.
Oh, okay. I mean, I would expect no less.
And you have to actually get an item in the world to do it. And it's
okay. So they're making it, you pay for it.
And it's not clear. It doesn't say this item resets your stats.
Okay. I guess.
But the way the internet is now, you know it.
Yeah. I mean, you got to make, at some point, things become more and more approachable.
You kind of.
Yeah.
It's the nature of it.
Yeah. The nature of free markets and money.
Right.
Eventually, it's going to, but you want to try and reach a broader audience.
But Dark Souls 3 is still every bit as difficult as Dark Souls 1 and 2. It has that challenge. It demands you get better at stuff. And yes, you've killed this kind of almost boss enemy. It's still there. When you reset it at the bonfire, it's still there. You have to fight it every time. So you either run past it or get really good at fighting it.
And I mean, it's still similar to all the other Dark Souls games in that, you got your fat roll if you're over encumbered.
Heavy armor guy.
Yeah, or light armor, you're quicker, you can dodge better. Because I know I went for, in my Dark Souls play, a very agility-focused build and using the katanas that are available.
Yeah.
And imbuing those with, magic damage. Is that still... I mean, I'm sure it's still similar in the other games.
Yes, there's...
they've become more approachable, though, has that been diminished at all? Have you lost the same variety and kind of weird nooks and crannies of the game that you can dig into and discover kind of weird stuff to add to your build or things that are kind of a game changer in some regards?
I don't know about
has it become more linear? Is it still pretty open?
People will argue that Dark Souls 3 is very linear. And I see what they're saying, but it still doesn't give you any signposting, and you can get in the wrong. You can get kind of lost if you're not paying attention. But it is fairly straightforward in where you go next. And there are some branches, but they all kind of split and then rejoin and then split. It's okay. It is. I like it. I like the way it is. And I'll tell you what. One great moment that you have is I was watching a video of somebody doing this, and so I was looking at it myself. There are certain spots that you can stand and see the entire game or see all different locations in the game, and while you don't realize it at the time, you're looking at places that you will go, and when you're there, you can then turn around and look back at places that you have been. And
that was very true of Dark Souls as well.
Yes, yeah.
You could look out and see the greater world that existed, and I did really enjoy that about Dark Souls. I did feel it was very open worldy, and there were ways to get 2 different places.
Right. And wander into places that you don't have any business being into because you're way too low level.
And granted, like Dark Souls does have a very distinct pattern to its levels as well.
Yes.
Like as you go through, you open up shortcuts to get to later portions of these stages.
Absolutely.
A lot easier. And I'm sure that still exists because it's a very well designed way to go about
it's beautiful.
Progressing.
It's not only do you like, I need another bonfire, and you're kind of searching, exploring nooks and crannies, and you go, hey, where does this elevator go? Or where does this gate open up? And you're like, there's my old bonfire.
Yep.
I've now done a loop. I am now. Oh, no.
Now you have the shortcut to move on.
Yeah, you can now pass through that so much faster.
So much faster rather than having to grind your way through every time.
Also, screw Blighttown.
Blighttown Mountain. Yeah, that was an interesting place.
I like the idea of it. It was way too status effect heavy for my taste.
Oh, okay.
But that's the point. That's the point. You're supposed to be miserable while you're there, and then you move on. Like,
it's basically Plague Town, USA.
It's. I think that illustrates my point is that it actually puts you in a place where the actual game world is actively draining hope from you. It's saying, no, despair. This place is miserable. You don't want to be here. Why would you want to be here?
But then it also ties you to so many cool places.
It does.
Like you can go a few different really like fascinating encounters that seem like you could just bypass. Like you don't actually need to be there. You don't need to go and kill or interact with these people. They're kind of in these weird corners of the game. And if you weren't really digging in, you could miss huge swaths of different things and items.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating and kind of adds to that difficulty level.
Well, like just a quick example of that is with Lautrec, the Golden Armor Knight.
Yes.
Who kills the Firekeeper of Firelink Shrine. If you weren't paying attention, one, you could not save him, and that never happens. You can save him, he kills her, you don't realize it, you're just like, oh, the bonfire's out, whatever, and you keep going, I guess I need to move on. You can find the item, not know when you're supposed to use it, that lets you invade his world. You invade his instance of where he's from. You kill him, get her soul back, and you can then go back to Firelink and resurrect her.
Yes.
And now,
very much so. That's actually and it's right there at that Blighttown part as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you're like, what? This is. I would have, I had some heads up about that. That's how I knew how I could do it, and that's a fantastic part of that game.
Yeah, and also that first vendor I think that you come to has a one of the katanas. Like there's a couple of the katanas in the game.
Oh yeah, the skeleton guy.
Yeah, skeleton guy. He's like the first vendor you come across, and in order to get this katana, you have to straight up kill him, and he's gone. He's gone from the game world.
Wow.
At that point. And you kind of have to make that decision. You have to make that call because it's a pretty good, like if you're going to go with one of those agility builds, it's a very good sword for, especially early on. And you can level it up to a point that it's still like pretty viable throughout the whole game.
Keep it competitive.
Yeah. And that was an interesting dilemma I had for a while because I knew there's a katana later on. Oddly enough, it's also in Blighttown, but that's pretty into the game.
Yeah, Blighttown is a ways.
Yeah, it's a ways in, and you have to kind of make that call. Like, do I want to keep this guy, this vendor, who's fairly critical to like being able to restock and get a hold of some different items?
I was grinding through that area a lot. I was at him a ton.
Yeah, same.
Because you have to buy the bow and the arrows to take the dragon tail off and get the Drake sword.
Get the Drake sword, yeah. Drake sword is rad too.
But late game it becomes useless, which is great. I mean, you can't keep it. But
it's super OP until you get past where it's super OP.
Right, and when it becomes par because it doesn't scale with any of your stats.
Right.
Whereas
you have to farm up specific dragon items to upgrade it.
Yeah.
And it just becomes
not
as good.
Yeah.
Not as good. So yeah, I came to that knowing that he had a really good sword on him, and every time I pass, I'm just like, ooh, man, like that. He's got that sword. He's got that sword.
So it's not just a decision you made; it's a decision you had to make every single time.
Every time I talk to him, until eventually I had to just murder him and take the sword, which I didn't. I regret nothing because it ended up being rad. Like it was cool. It did affect the world, and so much of that game is interesting in that everything does have consequences,
and that defines your character
very much so.
And even though the game never judges you, never does anything, and never judges you for that, you defined your character in that moment.
Very much, yeah. And you're just kind of like, well, this is how it is now. I'm just gonna have to deal with it.
That guy's gone. I'm past that.
Yep. And I think he even had he talks about his family and how they're nearby or whatever. And I think at some point they're like, you find out they're also zombies. I guess everyone's zombies in that area.
Yeah,
anyway.
everybody's undead.
Yeah, everybody's undead.
It's whether or not they're hollow.
When you do kill him, I think you do have to like fight his family. I can't remember.
Oh, interesting.
They pop out of like a side door, and you have to end up killing everyone. But
wow,
yeah, kind of interesting, like moral-ish dilemmas that
are self-imposed.
Yeah, very much self-imposed, and it is based on the very light narrative that they do give you. And he's not a nice dude. He's a jerk. He's just like.
And he's constantly laughing at your misfortune.
Yeah, and but that's super annoying, and you want to kill him the whole time.
But does that make him worthy of death?
Isn't that age-old question?
Right. Like,
who are you to decide?
Right. Well, you are either the person who lights the first flame or the Dark Lord. So I mean, you get to decide that.
Yep. And it's great in that it lets that kind of just mature in your own head and your own headcanon as you apply it to a game, which makes it deeper. And even though it may not have, the buzzword of the era at this point is like, does it earn that? Does it earn that in the way that it presents it to you? And in ways I would say yes, other ways I'd say no, in that it is more of a world building than a character building narrative. A good world let you step in as a blank slate and define your character by how they interact with that world. And maybe I don't RP enough to give that the weight it could probably have had. Okay. See, for me, it was never I'm going to do things this way, but I did kind of find myself looking at what I was doing, deciding on how that made my character, and actually making efforts to stick to that. So it is it's an issue, non-issue. No, that's not. Well, I mean, that's also an interesting way to approach a game. Like and I, it's probably one of my faults in that I don't necessarily RP in a way that like I'm investing a lot into the character itself. But I'm looking at it as more of like an experience and a gameplay, right? From a gameplay perspective, not a when you have headcanon kind of way. When you have to go back, you need to be open to that. That's now a thing you could be open for. It'll be interesting to jump in and look at it from that perspective. Yeah. Makes me want to jump back into that game. We should, absolutely. You're going to have to jump back into that game because at some point we have to play everything, right? It's true. And it may be a little while though, because we are on the cusp of Monster Hunter World. Yes, this is true. I hope that even though I didn't get to the description of why I didn't get too deep into the hope part. I like setting up, the setting up. Here's why this place is dark. Here's why it's about hope for me. Dark Souls is a game about hope. That's just how I've always felt about it, especially because I should also add, there is that feeling of when you beat a boss or complete a challenge or get through a section that is particularly punishing for you, and you feel like you have conquered. Not just gotten through it, not just succeeded, but you feel like I am over this. I have completed. I am the champion, my friends, all of that. You feel that I don't want to call it maybe endorphin, maybe adrenaline. It's there. You have that. You have a deeper sense of accomplishment. Agreed. I only got hung up on a couple fights, but they did take me a number of attempts. And generally it was because I like we have talked about already, they don't really surface a lot of the mechanics of you getting more powerful, and it's you kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. So coming into some of these fights, you are completely unprepared. Maybe your spec is completely off, and that fight becomes exponentially more difficult than it could be. And bashing your head against a thing is something I've been into, like while raiding or anything that's difficult, raiding in Destiny as well. There's something about kind of bashing your head against a wall and then overcoming it that is incredibly rewarding, and Dark Souls has distilled that into a form of solo progression that does not exist elsewhere. I have seen it's one of my rotating desktop backgrounds that is that I always love it when it makes me so happy when I see it when it pops up. But it's a kind of a Dark Souls, well, it is a Dark Souls picture, and then it just has the simple text: fall down 7 times, stand up 8. And it's just, that is what that game is. So heartwarming.
Right. Well, and when we were talking about it, when I was kind of running by some of these ideas on you, I showed you the Dark Souls 2 trailer.
Oh,
the,
right, yeah.
The official company one, it says that basically it shows a guy like kind of succeeding and then just getting totally destroyed by a dragon, and the voiceover saying it's not about death, it's about what you can learn from death. It's about being stronger. It's about overcoming weakness. It's about all these different things. So there's this ethos is clearly around for that game where it's just be better. It's like Dark Souls, be better.
Be better, yeah. And I mean, that's a valid philosophy as well, like in real life, and can very much apply to, everyday stuff. It's not the successes necessarily. It's what you take from failure.
Right.
How you can move that forward and be better every time.
One of my favorite people I like to read on Twitter posted something saying he's considered one of the best Enter the Gungeon players.
Okay.
And he's quoting off stats. He's like, I've beaten the game maybe 100 times. I have definitely failed more than 1,000. But you know what? People remember the successes. You remember the successes. People don't worry about how many times I've failed. They remember the times I succeeded.
And that's where it is more applied to your own headcanon,
right.
As far as the failures are far more rewarding, I guess, or more affecting than success necessarily is.
I will say the failures are your failures gain meaning through your success
eventually.
Yes, I mean when you succeed, you basically give context and you give
a body of knowledge,
a through line. You've made all those failures worth it the moment you succeed. When you fail and quit, you have just failed.
You just failed, yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you failed the first time or the 30th time and you walk away. You
still walked away.
You walked away, and I'm bad at walking away, but with Dark Souls, I tend to get partway through, walk away, and generally restart a character when I come back X number of months later and go, no, this is the time, and get through it. This
is the run.
That's what I meant with Dark Souls 3 right now. Dark Souls 2 actually might have been an outlier. I did kind of stick through that one, but I may have accidentally summoned in the last fight, not really it was the last fight, and had an easier time with it. Oops.
Those games are a bit of an endurance run. They are definitely a test of endurance in that they throw so many difficult encounters at you that you are bound to get hung up a number of times throughout, whether it's a boss fight, whether it's just getting from point A to point B and not necessarily and just hitting that kind of a wall over and over. It is a test.
Absolutely. And for me personally, I've noticed this with Dark Souls 3 specifically. It has me on edge the whole time I'm playing. I'm worried about dying. When most games,
there's always that constant you're farming up souls, and
if you die,
if you can't get back to that, or
you lose those souls,
or if you're accidentally you just walk through the wrong door at the wrong time,
and your souls are now there on the other side of that door.
You have to get back to there some way.
Yep.
And without dying,
you have to let the souls go.
Sometimes you got to let those souls go.
Last night I lost a lot of souls. And it was a stupid mistake, but you know what? I learned to let the souls go. But see, here's the thing is, I'm getting to the point where that tension, that worry is now just kind of becoming like a horror movie. That kind of nervous excitement, that kind of all right, just kind of psyching myself up and trying to be like, I can do this, and trying to get through certain sections. And I have found myself this playthrough of Dark Souls being much more adventurous. And saying, when I normally just go back and forth, farm, master an area, saying this is a difficult area, I'll get through it once and maybe just skirt around it after that. As being like, well, if I have to run back through here, I'm hosed, so I better not run back through here. And finding myself kind of pushing myself to not stay farm and overcome an area to the point where I've mastered it, but I'm also moving through the game quicker.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's just playing it a little bit different in that way, because I want to say no, I want to get better at the game without necessarily. This time, I want to get better at the game without necessarily just farming up souls,
overpowering,
and also I don't want to build hardwired muscle memory for each fight. I just want to learn the fight so I can still mess up, and I want to be on that. I don't want to get to that rote repetition. This guy does this, then I do this, then he does this, then I do that. I want to keep that fresh as I'm playing through.
Is there a way to do that though? In that, like, all of these things are mechanically driven. They all do have patterns. They all have telegraphing things.
But it's randomized enough. And if I'm trying to move forward constantly, you're kind
it's
of
always going to be fresh.
It's going to be fresh. It's because you'll get to new areas and things change.
Right.
So that's the plan.
Okay. I'm also definitely an approach to take to it, just to keep it not get tired of fighting the same stuff.
Also, instead of doing the tanky build I typically do, I'm trying a dex strength hybrid build.
Okay.
I found a long sword that's pretty cool, and I want to see how that goes. In fact, some of the footage that we'll be playing will be of that sword, that build.
Oh, very nice.
So I think that just about wraps up my thoughts and your thoughts about my thoughts.
Sure, yeah.
About Dark Souls and the hopefulness of it. I hope people get what I'm saying. Even though we spent most of our time talking about how dark and kind of dramatic everything is, but at the end, it's like, no, I've decided it's a game about hope. So I guess if you disagree, I'm sorry, but it just is. Maybe in your dimension, it's all about sadness, but here it's all about hope and the sun bros.
Sun bros. Praise the sun.
For life. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Hope you tune in again. Let us know if you like this, and these are more labor-intensive videos. We wanted to do content like this because, frankly, it allows Joe and I to sit around and BS about this kind of stuff. And yeah, let us know what you think, and we'll see about doing some more features like this. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
Catch you guys later.